I'm John Travis in Sydney, Australia on the 19th of November 2020, talking to Mitch Hall in Oakland, California, where reluctantly it's still only the 18th of November.
You are in my future, Jack.
Yes, yes. 5 hours behind and a day ahead. So I've known you, Mitch, now for almost 20 years. You came to our first ATLC summit down in Santa Barbara in 2003. And we hit it off. First of all, you're a normal sized person. In fact, I was 6'5". It's questionable now, but you're even an inch taller, aren't you?
No, I think I'm 6'2".
Oh, okay. I thought you were closer to.
Well, I hold myself upright.
Yeah. Well, we immediately hit it off, and I learned a lot about your earlier work and our commonalities, which we'll explore as we move along through your history. But I see you as a pioneer in probably more in infant wellness and attachment, but you're certainly across the board wellness guy from, dyed in the wool. And we'll explore what that is, beginning with who you are and why, and what led you what led you into your career, and where you were born, parents, siblings, environmental influences, what your parents did or didn't do, all that stuff. So let's go back in time to the 1940s and start there.
Good. I was born right shortly before the end of 1942 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Apparently there was a blizzard the night that my mom started feeling contractions. The blizzard was starting. She asked my grandmother to call a cab to take her to the hospital. My grandmother fainted when she heard my mom was having contractions.
That's helpful.
So my mom called the cab, and I was born at University of Pennsylvania Hospital in the wee hours of the morning. And with that auspicious beginning, not necessarily securely biologically rooted, attached maternal ancestry there.
Yeah.
So early childhood was in Philadelphia until second grade. I lived with my mom and grandparents in my grandparents' house because my dad, a very successful sort of business executive, basically did something that you influenced the book being written about and wrote the pioneering article about why did dads leave. So anyhow, he abandoned my mom and me. She didn't know about it when she was pregnant with me. And among my early childhood friends, I was the only kid that had divorced parents. At any rate, there's a long story how she found it out. But so at any rate, I didn't quite fit just from that particular angle. My mom and maternal grandparents were Jewish, and World War II was raging, and I was born 42, the year when the most Jews of any singular year of the Holocaust were killed in Europe, and my mom's 18 months younger brother was a soldier in World War II. So the early months and years of my life, there was that in the background. As I started picking up on language very, very early, I mean, my uncle was wounded twice. At the Battle of the Bulge was the last wound, and my grandmom was very anxious would he survive. My grandfather reassured her. I have vague memories and I just remember when he came home from World War II. So that was in the background of my early childhood. My mom had worked as a secretary. She was a very successful student in school. She even won citywide essay writing competitions as a junior high and high school girl. And apparently her high school award-winning essay was about the causes of war. And she found greed, and she told me about it. And so somehow, that's an early imprint of what, my commitment to peace and nonviolence, as was World War II. So I did not have a stable two parents home growing up. My mom remarried when I was about to go into second grade and moved me away from the relative security and stability of my grandparents' home. And my maternal grandparents were Jewish immigrants from Paris. Their families originally came from Latvia. And so I was in Detroit for a school year, which was pretty traumatic. I wrote a story about it.
Oh yeah, I remember that story. Yeah.
Yeah. So her, she said in part she married because my dad had not been Jewish. So that was also back then, the Jews were not quite white, but now they're just kind of amalgamated into what's considered white. But in fact, there's a whole famous sociological essay on how the Jews became white. And it was around that time after World War II.
Well, you can enjoy white male privilege then.
Right. Plus my father's name, so I could kind of pass a little bit. So at any rate, and the stepfather in Detroit was he was very abusive. Let's put it that way, just to keep it simple. And so I experienced childhood trauma there. But the mother of one of my school friends, my classmates, found out about what was going on when I was terrified to go home from school because I had been, horsing around in playground and got a little rip in my pants, one of the pants, the trouser legs. And then I knew he would punish me if he found that, because I was punished for everything. So I was terrified to go home. And when this mother found, because I asked her to sew up my pants so it wouldn't show. And when she saw how terrorized I was, she said, I want to meet your mom. And I think she's the one that convinced my mom to get out of there. And so it was just one school year. And then I was back at my grandparents' house in Philly, where I then was there until the middle of 8th grade, when my mom married for the 3rd time and moved out to Long Island, about 30 miles east of New York City. It's on the South Shore of Long Island. So my childhood, I was in, we could say, well, actually my two houses of my grandparents, then one apartment of a stepfather, then the second stepfather. So I was in 4 different childhood homes. So, and had a lot of questions that emerged out of all of that. In terms of wellness and health, my mom, in one of her secretary jobs, she started working for the Philadelphia regional distributor of a then new food supplement called Nutrilite. It was years later bought up by Amway, but it was alfalfa based. And then she got into health foods. And so I was the only kid on the block whose mom was getting bottled water. These big glass bottles would come in. It was not plastic, even, of spring water. And then I couldn't eat sugar because she called it poison and everything. So there was this early exposure to, there are different ways of doing things. It's not just whatever is advertised on the 3 little channels of my parents' black and white TV set back in the day.
You're lucky. We only had 2 channels.
Oh, wow.
We didn't get ABC for a long time.
I see. Yeah. It was those 3 networks. Yeah. So anyhow, I don't know if I'm just digressing too much. I'm trying to think. So early influences was I didn't quite fit. I was the only kid that didn't have both parents living with them, for the period in Philly, which was my foundational period. And I was the only kid in my little play group that wasn't 100% either Jewish or not Jewish. And most of the kids in that neighborhood were Jewish. So I had questions about identity, like, what's the difference? Because I looked into people's eyes and everybody looked like one person. And I tried to look into myself. What are these 2 different ingredients, Jewish? Because there was a bigger deal made of it back then. In fact, some kids would bring me home, and I had very, very light blonde hair, and would bring me home to play, meet, and the mothers would start questioning why he was playing with me, because I didn't look Jewish. So there was prejudice against me from Jewish parents.
Both ways, yeah.
And then sometimes Christian people would kind of, oh, he's Jewish, yuck. So, so I started questioning the whole darn thing. And plus, the stepfather in Detroit had been a blatant, extreme racist against Black people. And his mother owned the building, and it was kind of a tenement. And there was an African-American lady who washed clothes, a widow living in the basement building. And I was forbidden to go down there, but somehow I befriended her, and when he wasn't around, my mom would let me go down, and I felt really safe with her, whereas I didn't feel safe in his apartment. So that raised more questions about identity and these group conflicts and Jews and Christians and white and not white and everything. So the whole thing didn't make sense to me. And then,
such a contrast with me growing up in a white bread, small Protestant town in Ohio where Catholics were considered the weirdest.
Right.
I had no idea. When I first met a Jewish guy at college, and he looked like the pictures from the Bible, it's like, wow, they're still around? That's how naive I was.
Right.
You were shaped early on with some important world views, and I'm assuming you're an only child. Then I didn't hear any siblings.
Yeah, that's right. I've been only child. My mom did remarry twice, but never had kids. I don't think she wanted any more. And then my birth father, whom I really didn't get to know until later years. I know he was around me a couple of times when I was an infant, but because there are pictures of it, but then I didn't really meet him consciously until I was a very high achieving high school, about to graduate from high school and a senior, and gotten scholarships to some good colleges and everything. And then I thought, oh yeah, now he's showing up because I turned out okay or something.
No, thanks.
That wasn't why. He was on a business trip to New York City and invited my mom and stepdad and me to meet at his hotel and have dinner there and so on. So I met him. So at any rate, this identity question is important to me in terms of societal levels of wellness and healing. So I was being prepared for a bar mitzvah, and I was having a lot of questions about identity. And on my grandparents' little tiny black and white TV set, with the 3 ABC, NBC, and CBS channels, usually I watch cowboy movies, but there was a little documentary I stumbled upon about Gandhi and nonviolent resistance in India. I was maybe 11 or 12 even, I don't know. And I sat there, it was amazing. And you could just sit down, cross your legs, and sit on a railroad track and stop trains from coming or refuse to do something. So one afternoon during the week, when I was supposed to go to Hebrew school, which was after school in the afternoons, to learn Hebrew and learn the prayers and prepare for the bar mitzvah, I crossed my legs and I sat down, and I did my first nonviolent resistance protest, and I refused to go to Hebrew school anymore. So I was not bar mitzvahed. Part of it was, who am I? What's this question about human identity? Part of it was, when I asked questions, when I discovered my uncle's photos from World War II of all the massacred human beings and emaciated survivors from the concentration camps, I said, why did that happen to them? It said, because they were Jewish. And that was the extent of my grandparents and mom's understanding. I said, gee, is that what happens to you? But then I had a violent Jewish stepfather who was very abusive to me. Did I want to get into that? So anyhow, I just rebelled against any identity, other than being human.
It's a good identity to have, yeah. With that one.
That's got plenty of problems with it already.
Well,
so anyhow, this is some crazy childhood stuff, and so I had an early exposure from my mom about health foods, and this early exposure about identity, and just trying to say, can't people just get along with one another? We're all human. And I had known Lily, this African-American washerwoman, who was such a big influence on me. And because I felt safe with her, she was warm and nurturing. I used to make up when she would be ironing clothes for people. I would be down there in the daytime. As long as the stepfather didn't know I went there, my mom was cool with it. And then I'd make up little fantasy stories, you know, kids stories, and she would laugh and tell me I had a good imagination, and just it was safe to be with her. So, you know, anyhow, early influences of a kind of childhood that I needed years of therapy afterwards to cope with and not replay the scenarios of. And there was more to it, but some of those things I just wanted to mention in terms of questioning the status quo. Now, my mom, may she rest in peace, became ill in later years. Actually, when I was still in high school, I think there was an early diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis. And when I was still in high school, there was a diagnosis. And then she started being treated by, you know, Orthodox MDs who gave her things that were later found to have horrific side effects. And her face swelled up, you know, the moon face from the cortisol she got and everything. And so she got she had it for the rest of her life. Severe, you know, inflammatory rheumatoid arthritis. And she had been a beautiful dancer when she was young, and, you know, whole crowds would form around her in a ballroom to watch her dance. And I'd be this little kid on the periphery. Oh my God, that's my mom in there. And then, you know, all her joints degenerated. It was terrible. So, and during that time, I just started looking into natural medicine for her. I thought, well, Mom, there must be something better. And it's partly, so I started exploring nutrition and massage therapy, all kinds of things. And I don't know why, but I just pursued that for a long time, and still, you know, still do try to seek healthy ways, although for every, if there's any kind of diet anybody wants to adopt, they'll find a philosophy that advocates it. Well, anyhow, lots of controversy. So I hope I hope these random threads of association are making some kind of sense.
Yeah, it's all
about how I got on, I think, early influences onto this track of, you know, how do we take care of ourselves, and how do we be human in a world that's often inhuman, and so on, and how do we maintain wellness in a world that's often treating us at the symptomatic level but not at the base level, root level. And I know a lot of your work has gone deeper and deeper into this. So
yeah, we'll get to that more as we move through your life, but I'm curious, as a student, were you a nerd, a jock, big man on campus? What was your school experience?
Interesting. You know, because of various things that were not happy for me, I remember when I was very good at school, always, but I didn't know it about myself, because I remember in 6th grade, my teacher invited me to become the lead actor in the school play, which was Hiawatha. So I was this kid with very light blonde curly hair at the time who played Hiawatha, the Indian chief. So, but I had never acted before. I said, well, why did you choose me? He said, because you would be able to remember the lines. And I said, oh, I didn't know that about me. I didn't. So I was like, ooh, okay. And I really had fun doing it. Also, we had standardized reading tests. I think they were early in 6th grade. And they said I was beyond the college level in my reading skill. I mean, in terms of the standardized test scales, and I didn't know that about myself. Just I love to read. And one of the best things about summer vacation for me was that then I could go to the library and go back with 2 arms full of books and just read everything I wanted and not have to be bothered with schoolwork or hours in school. So I read, you know, dozens and dozens of books every summer and was always doing that. So I was a nerd, but also, when I was in high school in the, you know, late 50s, I graduated in 1960, they called us a brain. But at the same time, I remember once I was always on sports teams. So I was once on in the locker room changing after, I don't know if it was soccer practice or track and field practice. And there was a guy who was also playing sports who had been a gang member as well. And he came over to me, he said, you know, you're a brain, but you're okay because you do sports, you know. So And then when I went to Columbia for undergrad, I was on the track team for the first semester and a half, but I felt, and then I was also I was in my self-identity, then I was a poet. So, and I was writing a lot of poetry. And then the literary crowd, none of them were athletes. And then the locker room crowd in college was a little bit crude and tough for me. So I kind of dropped out. Now I regret it because I actually enjoyed all the running and the jumping. But so I had both going for me, and I've kept up, physical activities to this day. Right now I teach Qigong, Tai Chi, yoga, meditation, and all that as one of my lines. But at the same time, I've cultivated, the nerdy intellectual things. I love to learn and share knowledge about, as you know, about various things, and which led me to attachment theory and neurobiology and so on, which I think is interrelated with the big peace and social justice issues. And also already in high school, in the senior year, which I again graduated in 1960, the first sit-ins at a Woolworths store, Woolworths in Greensboro, South Carolina had occurred. And I was one of the few kids in my high school that went on a picket line at the Woolworths in Long Island, in Nassau County on Long Island. So I was already in civil rights demonstrations as a high school student.
In 60. Wow, that's really early.
It was very early. And when I heard about it, I immediately went to it. I didn't realize at the time it was probably my friendship with Lily, this African-American washerwoman who I felt safe with, who showed me love. That when I heard Black people couldn't sit down at the same lunch counter with white people, I was so, yeah, I'm into that. And I stayed with the civil rights movement continuously for many years. Of course, it's all morphed into, different forms of social change movement. Up to this day, we still have these major issues over overcoming racism. But I was passionate about it. And even in college, I took a course in contemporary ethics, was taught by the famous Protestant theologian Reinhold Niebuhr and his wife Ursula at Columbia.
Really?
Yeah. I knew Reinhold. In fact, yeah. Oh, I have some funny stories. But yeah, he was a big, very famous Protestant theologian and big influence. I think one of his books was Moral Man and Immoral Society. And but at any rate, yeah. So why was I getting? Oh, but so my paper in the contemporary ethics course was about about racism, and I, in the first religion course I took, I wrote a paper about Martin Luther King and the nonviolent civil rights movement, and it was some definition Paul Tillich, another Protestant theologian, had given of God as the power of being overcoming non-being. And so I used that and said, well, that's the civil rights movement is giving demonstration of that with the nonviolent. So there was the Gandhian nonviolence transformed into Kingian nonviolence, that was manifesting that. And so I interpreted it through that lens. And I would think I was just a sophomore at the time. So anyhow, yeah, so I stayed with that in some of my writings at the time as an undergraduate student and some of the coursework I did and all that. So I became a social justice, peace and social justice activist already in high school. And then I was reading the Beatniks. My senior paper in high school in the honors English class was about the Beatniks.
And so, you would have been reading Howell and
Howell and the Dharma Bums and On the Road and Ferlinghetti, Kerouac, Ginsberg, Corso, and their dabblings in Buddhism. And my high school English teacher was a big influence on me. In fact, my mom and her family were kind of angry because I had originally said I was going to become a medical doctor. And then I said, no, I'm a poet. And so they blame me because I loved my high school English teacher, Miss Dorothy Sullivan, so much. She taught when we were seniors, she offered for the first time in that high school a world literature course. And we read Japanese haiku the Chinese poets of the Tang Dynasty and, you know, world literature. It's like, wow, I love that stuff so much. So I got steered away from the sciences into the humanities and social sciences. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'm
Yeah.
curious with all this going on, if you had any time for girls or guys.
No girls in my case.
I love how animated you are. I'm sitting here like a brick, and you're still alive.
I'm enjoying talking with you, Jack.
Yeah, it's a real inspiration. When I'm rapping, I'm going to get my body more into it.
Yeah. Well, you know, I like to move. My grandmother asked me if I used to say, Mitch, do you have St. Vitus dance?
I used to get that too. No more. I learned.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I was interested in girls. I remember by at least sixth grade, boys and girls would get together for little parties. We played spin the bottle, and that's when I first discovered kissing. I liked it. But my first serious girlfriend, I think I was a junior in high school. She was a senior. We were both honors students. And I fell for her big time. And then when she graduated from high school, she dumped me at one point, and I went through heartbreak, and I would just walk for hours on end. I walked all the way from Long Island to what's now Kennedy Airport. It used to be Idlewild Airport and back, and just like would walk and grieve. And then I'd jog on the track to work it off. And then I had another girlfriend in high school. And then in college, I was writing to my high school English teachers. This will tell you about girls. And I was pretty miserable in my first months at Columbia. And I would write to my high school English teacher, and she would sympathize. And then all of a sudden I wrote her a letter, and I said, you know, I'm feeling a lot better now. So my high school English teacher wrote back to me and said, what's her name? And she was right. I found a girlfriend. So yeah, there were girls, and there are lots of stories to tell, but it would probably be a distraction.
So from Columbia, what you graduated, what major, English? Or?
Well, of all crazy thing, I was going to be an English major because I thought that's what poets do. Mm-hmm. And then when I don't know if I was a freshman or a sophomore, maybe, there was an older classman who kind of took an interest in me. And he said, you know, there are other majors. Why don't I'm going to take you to see some other courses and see if something else appeals to you. So at the time, there was a seminar being given in the religion department that was on eros, agape, and philia. 3 Greek words for love, you know, erotic love, brotherly, sisterly love, and divine love. And it was being co-taught by, a Buddhist scholar from Romania, Anton Zygmunt Cherbu, a Hegelian scholar from Switzerland, Jakob Taubes, and maybe Susan Sontag, or because she was in the religion department at the time, the famous, you know, became famous filmmaker, novelist, and Susan Sontag. And Paul Goodman, the author of Growing Up Absurd, as well as many other books, he was auditing the class with his then boyfriend and young college kid he had picked up somewhere in the Midwest. And it was really fascinating, you know. And yeah, Susan Sontag was there. I can't remember if she was a faculty member or she was auditing, because she would often audit classes. And I was sort of blown away. And then because I had been reading about Zen Buddhism, and, you know, and the beatniks were part of the introduction, but I read, you know, Houston Smith's book on the world religions, and then D.T. Suzuki and all this stuff. So I got fascinated with religion, and then it was totally impractical, but that was my major. And Susan Sontag actually befriended me and became my mentor. And we corresponded for some years after that. And I visited her in New York a couple of times. I actually took her and her son, David Reef, bowling once. And that was like this plebeian exercise to this, you know, big renowned intellectual. It was kind of a funny story, bowling with Susan Sontag and her son. So first time in her life.
Wow.
So anyhow, I majored in religion, and I had some girlfriends, more serious ones in college, and then I married one of them when I was a senior and she was still a junior, and we became interested in Peace Corps. And Peace Corps had recruiters, which was relatively new, come through campus, and we took the whatever Peace Corps would give us, language aptitude exams and questionnaire. They had recruiters come to campus, and we were selected. But I still had to wait for her to graduate from college for another year. But we were in a 2-summer training program. We were selected to go to French West Africa in Togo. Well, we didn't know yet, but there were several countries people were going to go. Senegal, Ivory Coast, Togo, what was then called Dahomey, or Upper Volta was also, now it's called the Benin. Dahomey's become, Dahomey's Upper Volta is Burkina Faso. That's where, Sobonfu came from. Yeah. So anyhow, so I was in, so after Columbia, I was in a 2-summer program, and I didn't know what I was going to do, but I just started applying for teaching jobs, and there was a nice kind of a school and almost in Greenwich Village called Grace Church School. It was associated with Grace Church, the sort of very upper crust Episcopalian church down close to Greenwich Village. And they had an opening for a 5th and 6th grade history teacher. And I went and interviewed, and the headmaster liked me, and he actually offered me the job. He said, "But if I offer you this job, how long will you stay here?" And so this was the moment of truth. Do I tell him I'm planning to go on the Peace Corps after that year or not? And I thought, I better tell him. So I told him. He said, "Fine, then I accept you for this job." He said, who says I want to keep you beyond a year anyhow? I got into teaching 5th and 6th grade history with all kinds of fascinating kids, the daughter of the president of NYU, some granddaughters of a senator, Douglas from Illinois. And it was an interesting year at any rate. And the son of Frederick Frank, who was, he wrote The Zen of Seeing, and he had been the tropical dentist at Albert Schweitzer's hospital for a time, wrote books on it. He was an artist, author, and a Zen artist kind of. But at any rate, it was a good experience. And then I had 2 summers of training, went to Peace Corps in Togo for 2 years. And I hadn't studied French before. And so I worked really hard and became fluent in French. The first summer of training, they said, Foreign Service Institute tested me at 0 at the beginning, and I was at level 3, which is the first level of functional fluency. And by the time I finished Peace Corps, I think it was 4+, which is professional interpreters level. The only level higher than that is 5, which is you could be a spy actually and pass.
Good criterion.
So I taught for 2 years in Togo, a military dictatorship, favorable to Western imperialism, the first of the many military dictatorships where a democratically elected president was assassinated by the military. And that was a live experience. I've written a bunch of poems recently about my experience back then. So at any rate.
This was with your now wife.
No, that was with my then wife. Yeah, my first wife of 2. Yeah. And she was African-American. I mean, actually half, but in this country that makes you full. So, right. So she wanted to, follow her aunt. I was kind of interested in India at the time because of the spirituality and all that, but the gurus. But she wanted to go to Africa, and I went, and I'm glad I did. It was instead of grad school. But then we went to grad school after that, and I went to University of Chicago, and I decided to do something dealing with social change. So I majored in sociology. And the first meeting with the chairman of the department, Morris Janowitz, he said, "We're getting too many young graduate students who are in sociology because they want to change the world. Sociology is not about changing the world. It's about data and analyzing data." And It was in the days when those old huge computers, they had those J cards, they were called, these stacks of cards with holes in them and everything were just starting. He said, like, see this stack of cards here for the rest of my life. There's enough data here already to, by myself, I can analyze it, but now the machines can do it so much faster. So yeah, there was a more conservative trend, and it was sort of Parsonian functional structural functionalists or something. And I was into social change. I've been reading C. Wright Mills, like The Power Elite and
Power
White
Elite,
Collar.
that was the book I read in college that really woke me up. Wow.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. So I went in, I wanted to study sociology to work for social change. And then I felt like an alien there. And I'd already taught for 3 years out of school, and I was a little disillusioned with the lecture style and the lack of interaction. But at any rate, I managed to pull out a master's of it, and I wrote my thesis on the social impact of the Togolese school system, which I said was really a post-colonial system of alienation that you know, was teaching the students to value European values and skills, but the school system was growing rapidly, but the economy wasn't. So what were they going to do after they graduated from high school, unless they had influential parents in the military or something? Then they'd move along. But a lot of them, but it was just, you know. So I wrote my thesis about that, and then I went. Oh, and while I was in grad school, 67, 68 school year, the military took away deferments from the draft for grad students. So I'd already served 2 years in Peace Corps, but that didn't protect me from getting into the military, from being drafted. So they tried to draft me when I was working on my master's thesis. So the options were go into the military, be sent to Vietnam to kill or be killed, or both, go underground and try to hide out, go to jail. And since I hadn't applied for conscientious objector status when I was 18 and registered for the draft, and since I wasn't part of a historic peace church, I thought they'd never give me that status now because they were against all the so-called draft dodgers. Go to Sweden. Some people went to Sweden, some went to Canada, and there was one option left. There was a critical teaching shortage in the inner city schools, where mostly Black and Latino populations were. And I actually drove from Chicago to New York City, got some interviews, and I got hired to teach at a junior high school on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And I felt, well, I love to teach. I love to help people from underprivileged backgrounds. I was in Peace Corps, and here this would be doing more service, and that got me out of the draft then. And it was service. It was a demanding job, and it was a high tension year because it was the year that the one of the school districts in New York, Ocean Hill Brownsville, had given the local community school board moral autonomy. And after a 2-year investigation, they fired some teachers that they said had a record of racism. And then so the whole New York teachers, the New York City Teachers Union went on strike. And some of us young, more idealistic teachers thought, well, our solidarity was with the most underprivileged people, which was the Black community in Ocean Hill, Brownsville, and not with the teachers union. So we would open schools. So I became like a conscientious objector, and I actually literally opened the school with a crowbar that morning, and I was almost arrested because union teachers were observing because they had locked up the school. And then the principal came along. She was a Black woman from Barbados originally. And she intervened and told the police, no, we're going to have school. I'm not pressing charges. I'm the principal here. So we taught school during the teachers' strike, a bunch of younger idealists who were in solidarity. And so, you know, that was another. But the school was so chaotic, I started trying to find a little quiet place to have lunch. And there was a little kind of health food store that had a lunch counter down on Broadway, a short walk from the school. And I would go there, and it was peaceful, and there were nourishing foods, and they had books for sale. I started reading different books on wellness and health and nutrition. And I was starting to find some peace. Now I go back to the chaos of the school where, you know, and when the teachers from the union came back, it even became crazier. So anyhow, So the wellness theme came up. Oh, and I started doing yoga. Swami Satchidananda had his first yoga studio on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, Integral Yoga Institute. And he was giving a free lecture every Friday night at the town hall in Manhattan. So I would hear his lectures. I started taking yoga classes. I started feeling better. And again, was still trying to find natural approaches to healing my mom from her progressive rheumatoid arthritis. So if this is too much information, tell me. I'm just free associating
I'm
here.
curious with Satchidananda because one of the other people I interviewed, Joan Bordeaux, was his secretary originally in New York.
Wow.
He was my landmark seminar leader, and I really I didn't know that part about it until I interviewed her. So, and
Wow.
then been to Yogaville, and I know a number of people that were involved with
Yeah.
Integral Yoga, so including their health food store in Charlottesville, right next to my friend's office, or Kent.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
His office is next door to what do they call the name of the store? Anyway, it's their food store in Charlottesville. So lots of connections before we met. Now,
Yeah.
Where's the wife in all this?
Well,
So,
good question. So both Anne, my first wife, and I went to Peace Corps together. And then we came back to University of Chicago together in sociology, both of us. She didn't like it, and she kind of dropped out at some point. She got interested in human geography. And so then I completed my master's degree actually that summer after the two, intensive semesters or trimesters maybe at Chicago. I forget how the system was. I think it was trimester. And I completed my master's, but she then enrolled in the human geography graduate program at Columbia, and we got an apartment on the Upper West Side, and we decided to separate and divorce. It was we weren't, there was nothing major or traumatic that happened, but we had a kind of amicable agreement, and so we separated, and then we filed for papers that within 3 years, whatever it was, we would get divorced. So while that happened while I was teaching at the inner city school in Manhattan at some point, yeah.
Mhm.
And she moved out of the apartment, and I continued teaching, and then yeah.
What's human geography?
Human geography is it's a subdiscipline that's offered in geography departments that looks into, I think, the mutual interactions between the environment and the landscape, and how humans shape the environment and how the environment shapes humans or something. I don't know that much about it, but she became fascinated with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's different from physical geography. So,
So then from graduate school and teaching in the Upper West Side, then what?
Oh, well, I had a transition where I became an interpreter for the French government press and information service that was based on the Upper East Side, on Central Park East. And then I got bored with the office work. I had a little sidetrack obsession. I became kind of involved as a macro neurotic a bit, and
for our viewers, I think he's referring to the macro food diet.
Right. And I got a little carried away with that and got to know some of the prominent leaders of that movement, and then I got disillusioned with it. So a bit of a long story, but I was the year before the first Earth Day happened, there was a kind of precursor to the Earth Day. And I was living near the Columbia University campus in a little rented room in a nice apartment that a family from El Salvador, from Dominican Republic owned, and they were offering me meals and all. And anyhow, I was writing mostly my stories from Africa. But I got very involved with reading books about ecology. And this was 1969, 1970.
Yeah. 70 was Earth Day, so it had been 69. Yeah.
Yeah, it was 69. And it happened when I had been on some Vietnam War demonstrations. And then there was a group called the AJOIN, the Alliance for Jobs or Income Now, and they were offering a lecture series, and I read a booklet about the Triple Revolution, and some co-authors wrote it, and then they were promoting that, and then they said there was a guy named Murray Bookchin who was new to me, and he was going to give some lectures about ecology, and I got interested, so I went to a loft on the Lower East Side, and he was very brainy. He was actually a founder of what was called Human Ecology, and I started reading his books, Our Synthetic Environment, and he was really talking about ecological issues. So in 1969, when Columbia was going to have this sort of precursor to Earth Day, I invited my childhood friend Earl up from Philadelphia. We went to it together, and we were blown away. And I was really thinking, my God, this is so important. And then I was looking for a job change, and there was a group called Vocations for Social Change that was going to have a meeting on the at Columbia Teachers College campus, just in a room. They were using the room to talk about how people could get involved with social change. And I was really concerned about peace and nonviolence in the environment. But I had a little part-time job that was going to end after that meeting had already started. So I thought, well, I'll finish my little part-time job and I'll go to the meeting and just catch at least what was left of it. When I got there, the room was empty. And there was on the floor one Vocations for Social Change little newsletter or newspaper. And I picked it up and I started reading through it. And there was a job opening with the Fellowship of Reconciliation, a venerable ecumenical peace organization. I was already familiar with it. I had heard talks by A.J. Muste, who was a renowned nonviolence leader, and by Bayard Rustin. I used to go, an African-American leader who was one of the people who taught Martin Luther King about nonviolent, Gandhi and nonviolence and everything, and a very, really brilliant guy. So and they had worked, Bayard had been with the Fellowship of Reconciliation for a while, and A.J. Muste was kind of the director of it for a long time. And they were, nonviolent ecumenical peace activists. And there's a book about Bayard Rustin called The Other Brother. And it's very interesting. He was a great civil rights leader. But at any rate, and there was a job that said, for somebody who's aware of the looming environmental crisis, I'm paraphrasing, and knew that the connections between the need for peace and ending the allocation of resources, money, and engineering and scientific skill to making war, to make peace so we could protect the environment, and protecting the environment could be a unifying theme that would bring together all people, because we'd all see we have to stop prevent mass starvation, prevent the extinction of species. It was 1969, 70. I applied out of the blue. I got interviewed for the job, and I was awarded as one of 3 traveling organizers starting in Europe. The night before I went for the interview, which was at a place I had never been to, I had a very vivid dream in which I saw a room where there was a fireplace. The mantle over the fireplace, there was a planted ivy or philodendron, and there was a picture of Gandhi, and the ivy or philodendron was growing around it. I just saw this room and I felt very peaceful from the dream. So I drove up I borrowed someone's car. I drove up to Nyack, New York, place I'd never been before. I went into the headquarters of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. They asked me to wait in the waiting room, and I went in there, and there was the fireplace, the plant, the picture of Gandhi. And wow. I said, oh my God, I dreamed this place. And I thought, I don't know what this means, but I think I'm going to get this job. And I did. So.
Wow. Have you had a lot of other experiences like that?
Oh yeah, there have been quite a few. Sort of precognitive dreams or imagery that would come to me. Yeah. And it was usually had something to do with when I was on my, because I've had a meandering path through life. It hasn't been a straight line, as you could already tell. But when I was on my path, some of these synchronicities or precognitions would come more easily. So I was sent to Europe. I was the fluent French-speaking, thanks to Peace Corps training and experience, the fluent French-speaking member of the organizer team. I was originally based in Belgium, in Brussels, Belgium, and then I was relocated to Paris, and I would travel around, and I was one of the people who organized an ecology conference that happened. I went down to Menton in southern France. I booked a hotel for the conference participants. I booked a conference hall in the town hall or something for the conference to meet. And even before going to Europe, from the headquarters in Nyack, New York, I invited at least one of the ecologists, a brilliant guy named Lawrence Slobodkin, who was teaching at SUNY in Stony Brook in New York State. And so ecologists from biologists and ecologists from 8 different countries came to the conference that I was one of the on-the-ground organizers of. And I was the fluent French speaker who organized all the logistics. And they drafted a declaration on the environment that we then circulated to scientists all over the world. We got translated into a few different languages. I got it translated into French. I didn't do it myself because translation should go from the second language into the first language. And I think it was actually some Vietnamese Buddhist refugee friends who I had do the translation and the printing. And then I wound up, it's a long story, I was the only person in the headquarters of what had been the Overseas Buddhist Vietnamese Association in Paris. It's a long story, it's amazing. Where I hand wrote to scientists in France, French-speaking Switzerland, Belgium, Luxembourg and all, and I collected all those signatures, and then it was being done in England, it was being done in the US, it was being done in Germany and so on. We had a German-speaking member of our team. And I forget how many tens of thousands of signatures we got, but the article, the declaration called the Menton Statement was then delivered at a public ceremony to U Thant, the General Secretary of the UN at the time. And it was a full-page, ad in the New York Times, and the UNESCO Courier, the monthly publication of UNESCO, published it in Paris as the cover story that scientists call out for protecting the environment and disarming because we have to do that. So we were early messengers of that. In 1972, the United Nations had its first full UN conference on the environment in Stockholm, Sweden, and our document was one of the working papers that the government participants were given to read prior to convening there, 1972. So, wow. Yeah, and I was sort of seduced away from my job to get another job. It's a long story that didn't work out. And then there was a young woman, and I got seduced away. Well, I don't want this to be in the public. I'm sorry. Delete it. Let's say I got involved with a young woman I wound up marrying, and then wound up in the States, wound up working at Stanford for a while, 10 years. Having kids there and deciding to, I don't know, we had home births. I was the midwife. Boys.
That's an important piece. I remember when I first met you of delivering your own kids. I tried to do that with my second daughter, but had a midwife on hand just in case, and it was so fast. But tell me more about how you got interested in home birth, and that's quite unusual at that period of time.
Very unusual. My first child was born in 1972. There were some books around. I forget when Suzanne Arms, our mutual friend, wrote Immaculate Deception.
That was 75. So
okay, so that was after it. But she was involved with I don't know, maybe I shouldn't talk about it. He was, I won't go mention the name, but was an obstetrician who was, I think, in Palo Alto. You know his name.
Talk about him in her talk, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so I was reading stuff, and I was really into living the natural lifestyle. And I would just, I don't know, I was reading Joseph Chilton Pierce, and again, I forget the dates of maybe that his Magical Child maybe probably came out after my kids were starting to be born too. But anyhow, my then wife didn't want to go to a hospital. And we saw this obstetrician that used to be, partner with Suzanne, and she didn't want to go through what he had to offer and everything. And then she said she wanted me to deliver the kids, and I had never even seen a dog or a cat born. I was really, but being a studious type, there was a whole, I was working at Stanford, there was, in Menlo Park, there was a Whole Earth truck store, and they had a little book, Manual for Rural Midwives in Mexico, was translated into English. And then because I worked at Stanford, I had access to the medical library. So I started getting these books about childbirth, obstetrics and all, out of the medical library. And then through a connection, I won't go into the details, but it was someone that used to be very close to Krishnamurti. I had met a yoga teacher lived in Berkeley, and her daughter taught the Bradley husband coach assisted childbirth. And so I talked with her, and she showed me a video about home births. I mean, video, it wasn't even, I don't know what it was. It was like a little movie or a home movie. I don't know. It was back early days, 72, I guess.
They had Viewmatic videos then, the 3/4 inch.
That was it. Yeah. So, and I got all the materials recommended in the midwifery manual for Mexican, rural midwives in Mexico.
You were well prepared.
I guess. So all the kids came out well, and some of them, there were slight complications. I dealt with it. And I swear, Jack, I look back, I said, was I crazy? How did I go along with this?
How many kids?
6.
Oh, wow.
3 sons, 3 daughters. There were minor complications that I dealt with, and somehow there was a knowing that seems to me it was more than just what I had read, that it was just there. I don't know how. Because
no one got on to you and getting birth certificates and stuff like that?
Did I get any certificates?
Well, I mean,
yeah. I would go to the town hall. I would get the application. I would fill it out, and I got birth certificates for all of them. Yeah.
But no one got on to the fact you were running this underground baby mill.
I don't think there was. No, it was only for my own kids. I would never.
How many years was this, over a period of 10 years or?
No, it was more like a period of 18 years. I think the oldest is now 48.
72, yeah, that'd be.
Yeah, 48. And then the youngest was born in, 72 to 90. That's, 18 years. 18
years, huh?
Yeah, the youngest is 30, the oldest is 48, yeah. Every 3 or 4 years, it was crazy. I mean, I say crazy because I did it each time, and each time was a little different. And, prolapsed cords 1 time, 2 times, and then one cord was a little too short. And somehow I felt that without the first touch. I said, this cord is too short. I can't slip it over the head. You got to push the baby out. I don't know how I knew that. Because it had to be, instant. So everybody was safe. There was a piece of placenta that had detached. And so I had to examine the placenta, and then I had to, so I had some homeopathic remedies on hand, and I did a certain kind of massage. It came out. I don't know. So maybe I just lucked out. And I don't know if any of my kids would be upset, or the ex would, that I'm making any of this public, but I'm not mentioning any names, and I want to keep it as
Yeah.
Maybe they'll never see these.
Brilliant.
But anyhow, so, and none of them, I know there's big debates about vaccinations, but none of them had vaccinations. And my first son's, one of his friends when he was very little was the daughter of two MDs who lived right across the street. And, their daughter got the ear infections. Our son never had one. I mean, back, at that point.
Yeah.
But I don't know. But natural food, healthy food, homeopathy, herbs. We did some gardening.
Any breaches? How long were the labors?
It varied. It varied from maybe 8.5 or 9 was the longest, and then like 2.5, 3 was the shortest. Yeah. But no breaches.
During this 18 years, were you still at Stanford, or what was your career?
No, 3 were at Stanford, and after 10.5 years, first I was teaching a couple of programs in the linguistics department, English to the foreign graduate students, because I had Peace Corps training in ESL teaching. And I set up a whole education program at Stanford Hospital for the blue collar workers, the people in the kitchen and mopping the floors. I gave ESL to those immigrants. I set up a high school equivalency course, and they would promise job promotions if they would pass their, the high school equivalency exam. So it was a good program. And I was just part-time work. And then I became the international student advisor at Stanford for my last 3.5 years there. And there was a lot of stuff going on with the mother of the kids and some conflicts and all, but we wound up leaving, did a move to Europe that didn't work out at all, wound up on the East Coast, lived in a couple of yoga ashrams for a year where I did editing of a couple of books for a publisher. One was called Return of the Goddess by the Jungian author Whitmont, Edward Christopher Whitmont, Jungian. Another was by Morton Kelsey called Christopsychology. Was kind of this professor at University of Notre Dame, theologian and Jungian, and pieced together an income. I was doing polarity therapy at the time. I had been trained in California by Pierre Panetier, and that was when I first heard of our friend Ray, because he was one of the founders of the American Polarity Therapy Association. So he was a well-known, prominent polarity therapist. But I was doing that, picking up income, and then I moved to Vermont and wound up getting some teaching jobs there. So 3 of the kids were born at Stanford, 3 were born in Vermont.
Mm-hmm. Where in Vermont?
Central Vermont, in the Mad River Valley, Waitsfield and Warren, outside of Montpelier, the capital city of Vermont. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they both are now. So, and then I wound up, first I was teaching at piecing together some part-time teaching at Johnson State College. And then I wound up teaching French and humanities at a private high school. It was a ski academy for, competitive ski racers. And then I got a job for 10 years at Norwich University in Vermont as director of the Peace Corps and Service Leadership Program, adjunct professor of sociology, teacher in their adult degree program. And on the side, I was always studying about wellness and holistic health. I had done a lot of yoga and Tai Chi in California, so I was keeping up those practices. I was always reading about holistic approaches to health and healing and wellness and so on. And I was an activist. I was still a social justice activist, yeah. And I at Norwich University, I kind of, in my last of 10 years there, when it came to light that the contract they had with the Indonesian military was actually with the Kopassus, who had been involved in the genocide in East Timor. And then an investigative journalist did the dirt on it. I became an outspoken critic of that contract they had with Kopassus, which was under, the Suharto dictatorship. and eventually I debated university spokespeople at the University of Vermont invited us, and I was interviewed on National Public Radio, and so eventually the what should I say? The university was not happy, but they had to sever a $500,000 a year contract with the Indonesian military. So our activism paid off, but it's a long story. I wound up leaving there after 10 years. So and moved.
You helped get the contract eliminated?
Yeah, we succeeded. To save face, they severed the contract. I wrote a story about it, and because it was just too embarrassing to them that you know they used the same excuse at School of the Americas did. Well, they're training military to learn how to be in a responsible, democratic democracy for accountability, but they had been involved in genocide. Was statistically the biggest percentage of a population murdered in genocide was in East Timor of the 20th century genocides. Not in terms of the aggregate numbers, but just the percentage of the population have been killed. So yeah, they were embarrassed. They severed it, but I was kind of they had what they called a reduction in force, and I was because I led the charge. I invited Alan Nairn, who had been at the news reporter with Amy Goodman, who was at the Santa Cruz massacre in Dili, the capital of East Timor. I invited him to speak at the university, which stirred up a whole bunch of stuff too. And we did a good job. And I, as I say, we had ethics on our side, and it prevailed. So then I got a job teaching in the Goddard College Health Arts and Sciences program. And that I felt really at home there. Goddard's a progressive school, and it was a master's level and bachelor's completion, junior and senior year completion of interdisciplinary self-designed study programs with a faculty advisor. And people who were midwives, who were nurses, who were massage therapists, acupuncturists, were completing degrees or getting their graduate degrees and related to health, arts, and sciences. So I taught in that for 5 years. It was limited residency and so on. Eventually moved back to California. Yeah. So anyhow, long journey, a lot of meanders. It doesn't go a straight line.
When did you come back to California?
Something like 2002 or 2003. Yeah.
Oh, so you were just back when I met you then?
Yeah. I was recently there. Yeah. Recently back, and I was with a woman at the time. I got divorced, a couple years before that, and then I was with a woman who wound up, first in an apartment, then bought a house in Sausalito. So I think that's where I was when we met. Yeah.
Yeah. So just this incredible story of summarizing it, you're really a poster child for the social change that needs to happen at a grassroots level. I mean, you're right there on the ground, not out preaching and selling books, but doing it and doing it in many different dimensions. And I'm just thinking that the word holistic comes up.
Yeah.
When I look at your life. When did you encounter that word, and was it at all in your vocabulary or?
Oh, very, very much so. I do not remember where I originally encountered it. That's a great question, but it made sense to me. I did take some training when I was in California with a Dr. John Diamond.
Oh, yes.
And he wrote a book on holism, a booklet or a small book, and it was called Remothering. And I was doing meditation practice and then trying to have kids raised more naturally and with as little sort of intervention that was unnecessary to their childbirth, to their healthcare and everything, and just but promoting wellness through it. And then being a social justice act, but also dealing with the spiritual side, the meditation, the body movement practices and all that. So yes, somehow that was all evolving, it was grassroots. And even from back in the Peace Corps days, I identified more I wanted to be on the grassroots wherever I was. I didn't want to be, in some prominent places. And then it was like reading, but remember I told you about the Holocaust and seeing my uncle's pictures. Well, it puzzled me. How does the Holocaust happen? And when I came across a book by Alice Miller called For Your Own Good, Hidden Cruelty and Child Rearing and the Roots of Violence, I said, oh my God, generations of child abuse. She put together brilliantly. It was cogent for me. And then I went on to that to discover Lloyd DeMouse's writings on psychohistory. And he was claiming that these historical traumas, the wars, the genocides, the economic depressions, were partly, or to large degree derived from childhood trauma and abuse and neglect. And he traced his history of childhood, which, historians may debate or just they may ignore it, but it made sense to me. So then I wanted to learn more about abuse and trauma. And then it led me into all the emerging traumatology studies and neurobiology and attachment research. And so then I said, oh, that started making sense. And when I looked at my own relationship difficulties and the 2 marriages, and then this one, relationship I moved to California with, but had to get out of because she was an abusive person. I'm not mentioning any names. I said, why isn't this working? So then attachment theory, secure attachment, anxious, preoccupied, avoidant, dismissive, chaos. And then it started, so these pieces of the puzzle of the, very intimate, familial, childbirth, child rearing, early imprints of relationship, romantic relationships, collective trauma, it all started making sense. So then I was an activist, I was a meditator, seeking a spiritual identity and path, and a parent and an educator and all that. And so somehow holistic became a really important word to me. Yeah. And it was a part of what I would wear. And when I was doing, and I still do some counseling work, and I kind of think of it as holistic wellness counseling, which I think you would point out, maybe holistic and wellness is sort of redundancy, but maybe it brings up something, I don't know.
Given how wellness has been dumbed down, I think you need to throw holistic in there because a lot of people don't get it. I'm also noticing that I lost my train of thought. How you've woven together, what was it? It'll come to me in a minute. You mentioned Tai Chi. Is Judith Weaver anywhere in your cross paths? I'm interviewing her next week.
It's another story. Do I dare tell it? I very briefly enrolled in the Santa Barbara Graduate SBGI, Graduate Institute. They had the pre and perinatal track and then the somatic psychology track. And she was the head of, because the woman I was with wanted me to go to complete a PhD, which I had started at the University of Chicago, but the Army tried to draft me. I just, I taught in the inner city school. I dropped out of grad school. I passed my master's, thank goodness, because that led to other jobs and more learning too. So I did have a brief time at SBGI where I met Judith Weaver. It wasn't a good match for me. Let's be discreet and just leave it at that. So I dropped out of SBGI. I didn't feel my needs would be met there. And then I wound up going to what's now Saybrook University. It had been the Institute for Humanistic Psychology Institute, and then Saybrook Graduate School and Research Center, and then it became Saybrook University. And then I was in that PhD program for a couple of semesters. And then rather than following the somatic, because it's all, I'm interested in so much, I wound up going into more the social transformation track. And that's where I met some of my favorite professors, like Mark Pilisic, a renowned peace psychologist. And eventually I met Carl Rogers' daughter, Natalie Rogers. She was teaching at Saybrook at the time. And she actually came to a lecture I had given at the Santa Rosa Peace and Justice Center, and then we became friends. And then Mark would send me to speak in his, when he was invited to speak at annual meetings of the American Psychological Association. He invited me he would send me in his stead. We became co-authors and public and peace. But I did run into Judith Weaver back in the day. Yeah, I've run into a lot of people.
I did a class with her in 1975 when I first got to Mill Valley, and then lost touch with her. But it turns out that I didn't know she was involved with sensory awareness, and which.
Oh yeah, that's her big thing. And by coincidence, I ran into a Japanese woman who came here to take a workshop with, there was a famous Chinese teacher, Master Lam Kam Shuen, who, of Qigong and standing meditation and all. And he had set up a center briefly here in Oakland. And I just went to one workshop there. And then this Japanese woman was there. And Judith Weaver was her teacher coming over to Japan. She set up sensory awareness training in Japan. And this Japanese woman was translating what is this, Charles Brooks' book about his wife Charlotte Selver's work with sensory awareness. And so she was translating it into Japanese. I happened to run into her. It was just, again, just coincidental crossing of paths along the way.
And then I remembered that I had done a Tai Chi workshop at Esalen with Al Wong.
Oh yeah.
And I'd driven him back from San Francisco, and then met up with him in Champaign-Urbana when I was giving a talk there, and he saw my name in the paper and came down. I said, I'm recalling in the middle of the workshop in the afternoon, Al Wong lives here. And 20 minutes later, he shows up in the back of the room. He saw my name in the paper.
Isn't that great? Yeah.
He's in his 80s and going strong.
Wow.
But what I realized, that what I was trying to remember before, is that if I don't forget it again, the saying, your gifts come from your wounds. Back when we were talking about our childhood trauma and how that really has shaped your gifts. So now we're up to about 2003 when you came to the first ATLC summit, and we met. And but I'm curious, you said that I invited you to it because I had been sent a copy of one of your booklets. And I'm not remembering who gave it to me or why. I just know that met.
I don't remember either. And you were in Australia at the time you wrote to me. And I liked what you wrote, and we just started communicating. But
then you introduced me to Robin Grill.
Yes.
Which has been a great gift to my life, and I've interviewed him. I heard you earlier mention, what's his name that I also met, your friend, childhood friend.
Earl Katz,
Earl, yeah.
And so, did I introduce you to Laura Huxley?
Yeah, well, somebody did. It must.
I think it was I, because Earl, my childhood friend, knew a woman named Eleanor Wasson who lived in Santa Cruz, and so Earl sent Eleanor Wasson my booklets, The Plague of Violence, a Preventable Epidemic, where I identified child abuse as a primary, factor leading to all this crazy violence in the world. And now I would add abuse and neglect and trauma, unhealed trauma. And then another book called Peace Quest, Cultivating Peace in a Violent Culture. He had sent them to Eleanor Wasson, and Eleanor knew about Laura Huxley's work. Children are, whatever it was called, our most precious resource or something. And so she sent my booklets to Laura Huxley, and then Laura wanted me to work with her. And so when I came out to California, I visited Laura in her Hollywood home and met Paul Fleiss, who had written so brilliantly against circumcision. And
I went up there. Paul took me up there when I met her.
Yeah.
And then I've also I stayed at Eleanor Wasson's house. That must have been through you also?
It may have been. Or through Earl, whom I introduced you to. Yeah. So I don't know who sent you those booklets. I'm trying to remember too, but at any rate, I was delighted, of course, to hear from you. And then it made sense. And also I was in touch with, you remember, Jordan Ryak. So I met Jordan Ryak and Robin Grill. Who else? Norm Lee. Maybe it was through the psychohistory list, the listserv where the Lloyd DeMouse was, facilitating at the time. And Jordan founded Parents and Teachers Against Violence in Education with this, single-minded focus of ending physical punishment, corporal punishment of kids at homes and in schools. And then Norm Lee was on the list too, and he also came to the first summit. And so, yeah, we met through these networks that joined together, raising kids without violence and giving them secure attachment and looking.
What a novel idea.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, it's too bad that Norm died and Jordan died. I wasn't able to interview either of them, but
yeah,
we were quite connected, and you connected me with a lot of people. But how did you meet Robin at a meeting?
No, we were both involved with the psychohistory listserv, and we started writing to each other, emails, and then exchanging writings, and that's how we connected. And I did meet with him in the US a couple of times. I just don't remember when. I think it was after we were already friends, and then he was writing his first book, and he invited me to, I was the dean at the School of Humanities at New College, and then he invited me to write the foreword to his first book, and which I was so enthusiastic about. That was Parenting for a Peaceful World. Right. So I wrote the foreword, and then he came over. He was an invited speaker at an APA conference in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And I don't remember the year. So I drove down there and attended the conference. And then through his networking, he had met a professor at this Buddhist university or college, Soka University, something in Orange County. So I drove him to Orange County to speak there. And then another time he came to San Francisco with his wife and daughter, and I met with them in San Francisco also. So we've been together a couple times. And then a third time we were going to meet, and it was when they were saying there was going to be the biggest rainstorm of the century or something coming to the Bay Area. And I chickened out and didn't want to fly during this big rainstorm. So he was in Los Angeles another time with his family. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we've had, video chats, and yeah. So since you were in Australia also, it was a natural to introduce you and Robin, and it was just such a good, a good fit. Yeah. Yeah,
we've had wonderful times together. So
now
he's in the Mullumbimby area, trying to figure out where they're going to move after they sold their house. So I'll see him next week when I get up there.
Oh, did they settle in the Mullumbimby area? Because I don't know the geography of us.
They're just staying up there while they work out what they're going to do. I'm hoping they will settle there, but he'd wanted to go, of course, back to Uruguay where he was born, and that's out, or to New Zealand. But anyway, we certainly have interplaying networks, don't we?
Amazing. And I've always loved networking ever since I was a kid, or maybe, a young kid. I thought, bringing good people together. That's what I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's one of my passions too. So
yeah, I know that worked me with a lot of people too. Yeah, that's for sure.
So you went to New College. I remember through Ralph, that was at was the second summit, I think. Did you come to the second summit as well?
I didn't. I don't know. I didn't come to the second summit. I'm not sure why.
But I did connect you with Ralph somehow. I was still in his place. This is Ralph Wolf, who I may get to interview at some point. And what you were doing before New College? You were
in the trend after. I was teaching in the Goddard College Health Arts and Sciences program. And this woman I had moved with to California with from Vermont, we had a little nonprofit organization that was basically about promoting peace through writings or something, Peace Quest. And then, we got it nonprofit status in Vermont, 501c3 status. And so with that organization, we published those 2 booklets that you saw one or both of. And I collaborated with her on her first graphic novel. I mean, I basically gave her research background that she integrated into the story that she wrote and drew, but it was really her energy in the graphic novel. And so we were collaborating on writing, and then it just didn't work out. I won't go into the details, but when my 2 kids my 2 youngest sons were going to come out to California, and she wouldn't, for 2 weeks, and she wouldn't have them stay at she had 2 places at the time, either of her places, for more than a week, and said guests should never stay more than a week. I said, they're not guests, they're my kids. So I thought, and I was calling my therapist, he said, Mitch, you got to get out of that. So I did. So anyhow, I did. He said, why are you in that abusive relationship? I said, I never called it abusive. He said, you've only been describing it to me for 4.5 years. I said, oh, I'm a slow learner.
Like you didn't realize you were college level.
It's what?
Like you didn't realize you had a good memory for playing Hiawatha or reading at the
right
levels.
Right. Yeah. The intellect is not the same as social emotional learning and maturity.
I'm not sure how much of your experience at New College you can share publicly, because it was a fascinating story that, again, you were a change agent, and
yeah,
but it's long gone, I think.
Yeah, it's out of business now, and yeah, I'll just prefer not to go into it much. But it was an old boys network, and I was a total outsider. And again, I felt I had to be true to my ethics. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that. But yeah, it was an interesting experience, and they did a lot of good. They were a self-designed progressive school, but yeah, it was. I was there maybe 4.5 years, and then I wound up being hired at the age of just when I was about to turn 65. The so-called retirement. I got hired by a community mental health clinic in Richmond, California, here in the East Bay, that serviced children and teenagers with Medi-Cal, which is Medi-Cal is the Medicaid. They were all on public assistance for healthcare, and so they had a specialization in Asian immigrant and refugee, and also Asian American kids, but they served kids from all backgrounds. So given I had enough training in counseling skills and experience, and I even had publications in psychology, they hired me even though I had not worked directly in that field. And then for 5 years, I was working there doing, wellness counseling with kids who had severe trauma backgrounds, who were in very violent neighborhoods, often, shootings, and refugee families from war-torn, Southeast Asia, people from, Latino and African-American kids. So I did full bore counseling work for traumatized kids and youth, and did play therapy. And I started introducing like yoga classes into one of the high schools where I was doing, my counseling services were both in the schools and in the agency's clinic. And it was a good service. I was there 5 years. And then I'm just having a funny memory. I like funny stories, even if they're tangential, but the head of the health center said, why don't you offer a yoga class, since you do that also? I said, okay, I'll offer a yoga class. And then the football coach thought it would be a good idea for his football players to do some yoga. And they were kind of, these cocky young athletic jocks. And here was a 60-some-year-old. I mean, I was in my upper 60s at that point. And one of them came in, this big buff teen guy, and he said, "What, you're the yoga teacher?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I was expecting some skinny white chick in spandex." Like, someone later told me I should have said sorry to disappoint you, but well, this is what you get. And then he said, "Well, you mean what they show us in the movies isn't true?" I said, "I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it isn't. Just do the class with me, and I could do some things they couldn't do." So then I got their respect. So
So that
yeah,
was a good experience. The whole team followed
yeah,
through.
they showed up. Yeah, yeah. So
Oh,
that
good.
was probably 69. I don't know. It was like, but I was doing the practices so I could do them, and they didn't have quite the flexibility or the balance in certain things that I did at my crazy age. So what the heck? So after that, I moved this psychologist in Chicago, who's also been quite an advocate for children's rights, had an agency called Psych Health Limited in the Chicago, which was based in Evanston. And she knew my work, and we had co-authored some papers and even a pamphlet on raising children nonviolently. And she applied for a contract and got it. And she wrote into the contract a position with me in mind to have a holistic health and wellness program. And she hired me, and I was the coordinator. So it was like an upgrade in position for me. And I did that about 4.5 years, and the agency's now out of business, or she sold it. But I was doing teletherapy. So that was innovative, and teaching these adults on public health how to regulate their own arousal and stress with breathing practices, or gentle movement, like roll wrist gentle movement coordinated with breathing, just with my
All by
voice,
phone.
all by phone, no visuals. We got great, they tracked the clinical results, people going back to jobs. They were astounded. So I was the lead author of a paper that she and the head of her, another psychologist was the head of her therapy team. We co-authored it. I was the lead author. And then I was invited to go to Dorland Health Care Coordination Conference in Maryland somewhere to present a paper and a slideshow and lead some of the, and so I presented a slideshow and led some of the, the therapists in the audience to do some of these very simple, low-risk practices for self-regulating arousal and stress and all. So yeah, so it was a holistic health and wellness program, lasted about 4.5 years, yeah.
Yeah.
And since then, I've been self-employed. I've been doing writing all along. I had several papers published, book chapters in counseling psychology, peace psychology, children's rights stuff. And then now I'm self-employed. I have some counseling clients. I have I'm a consultant for a social worker, and I'm teaching 8 Qigong, yoga, Tai Chi, meditation classes online, and I'm on the faculty of a yoga teachers training program. I was in faculty of a yoga therapist training program. That program doesn't exist anymore. So I've been piecing together a living, doing some writing on the side, and getting into, fallow periods where my writer fertility doesn't seem to be flowing, and then it flows again. So yeah. But and just trying to live a healthy lifestyle. And I'll turn 78 at the end of next month, at the end of December. So hanging in there, doing what I can, being thankful to be breathing and moving and alive. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're a few weeks ahead of me turning 78. We're both Capricorns from the same era.
Yes, we are from the same era for sure. And when I read about, what you wrote about or told about your early childhood medical history, parallel. Yeah.
Well, I didn't have the moving around and the abusive
Right.
parenting. My mom and dad's they were together physically, if not emotionally.
Yeah. Well said. Yeah.
It's what's interesting is that as well as our widely eclectic interests, both in adult and infant wellness. Yours primarily with delivering your kids, and I'm assuming they were breastfed. And
Yeah, yeah. And my ex-wife, I think at some point credited me because I had been in Africa for 2 years, so I'd see kids would be breastfed, maybe 4 years long and all that.
Yeah.
So I was just saying, look, this looks beautiful. It's healthier. And I read up on it, and I had the scientific information as it was coming out. And there was La Leche League, and there was all the advocacy. So again, it wasn't as widely spread. I was never breastfed, and yeah, it was treated as if it was some old-fashioned thing. I mean, there was just such an unnatural beginning. But I advocated for what seemed to me in nature's plan, and not what the patriarchal institutions or whatever had imposed on our culture. So yeah, and so those 2 years in Africa, I saw a lot. It just was a lot more natural and made a lot more sense to me. Yeah. And then I learned about attachment. I learned about bonding and Joe Pierce's books and so on. A lot. I just reading all the time. Reading was my refuge. Yeah.
I think you turned me on to Porges's work too. It might have been Ray, but you were the one that really hammered it home. So
yeah,
appreciate your knowledge, your scholarly endeavors, and sharing your knowledge.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I remember I'd given that talk, and Ray backed me up to an earlier in the earlier days of the connection calls. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, to wrap it up, what sort of wisdom do you want to pass on to future generations? Your summations of your life well lived, and any last, unspoken details?
Well, keep humble. Part of wisdom is, like Socrates said, to know you're not wise. Or you can be wise sometimes, and other times you're otherwise.
Oh, I love that one. Did you make that up?
No, I heard it.
That's a good one.
I heard it slightly differently said, but I said, that one works. Yeah.
Yeah.
To keep learning and know that there's always more to learn, and that really we have a lot of concepts where we think things are separate. We are the environment is us. Our body doesn't end with our skins. We're constantly breathing in the air, and the trees and the green plants are giving us the oxygen, and we're giving them the carbon dioxide, and we're eating the food that nature, we are the environment. And the holistic approach is really not just body, breath, and spirit, but body, breath, interpersonal human relationship, earth, life, all one. And just we can be seen like light. Light can be seen as a particle, like this person in this body with this name and this life story. And we're also waves. We're part of the intergenerational waves of evolutionary life that pass from other forms into humans. We don't know where it's all going, and so we're part of the whole, and the whole is within us, the microcosm, macrocosm. So I'm talking too many abstractions right now, but and to keep, I love the concept that Ashley Montague advanced in his book Growing Young. He was a physical anthropologist. I did talk with on the phone once, and I talked with his wife on the phone once after he had passed, and I read maybe a bunch of his books. But in Growing Young, he said the goal of life is to die young, as old as possible. And he explained the exegesis was to keep the traits of childhood, curiosity, enthusiasm, playfulness, and always learning and always engaging and moving. And so And in that book, he said the promise of a species is in the young, because we think like, and not growing up and getting all encrusted and rigid in so-called adult ways. Yeah, we learn maturity, hopefully, and we need the wisdom of maturity, but also with respect to the young, and then, you know, for work that the Alliance for Transforming the Lives of Children have done and that you've supported and everything, to know that if there's a good beginning, then it makes the rest so much easier. Prevention, preventing violence, preventing trauma, preventing abuse and neglect in the beginning of life, it makes the rest of life so much healthier, as we know from so much research and so much experience and all the tragedies in the world now. So that's why, you know, this connection with early life, which we who are older need to learn, and not just repeat things that were handed down in particular cultures if they were not in nature's plan. So it's kind of like the Taoist principle of returning to what's natural. And so much of the latest science is helping us recover another scientific validation for what's natural, that some indigenous cultures, not necessarily all, had kept going all along, while these violent, imperialistic dominator cultures just kept imposing these artificial models. So, you know, I love the Taoist image of just getting simpler, getting more natural. So I don't know. I'm just free associating here, Jack, on the spot.
It reminded me that I too had a phone call with Ashley Montague, and actually met him, although we didn't, he wouldn't know me, at a workshop that Al, bioenergetics, Al
Lowen.
And it was when what was his famous book? Because my first wife found that book.
Well, he had a lot of fame. The Natural Superiority of Women was one book.
Yeah, but there was another one about, was it pleasure or touch?
Touching the human significance of the skin, touching the human. That got me into polarity therapy. You know, I read that. I said, oh my God, touch is so important. And throughout our life cycle, that book also, oh my God, we need touch.
Oh, man,
he was great. Yeah, I know someone who was a friend of his, Ingrid Kepler-May. She's in her mid or upper 80s now. She had been one of Rollo May, the existential humanistic psychologist wives, and Ashley would visit them at their home here in the Bay Area. She's in Berkeley now, and she said he loved to dance. You know, as the old guy, he loved to dance. Yeah, I loved his works, and he wrote a lot about nonviolence and the cultural roots of nonviolence too, and different child rearing patterns that would promote more nonviolence. He was many voices who gave that anthropological perspective on that.
And he inspired Marilyn Milos to continue her work with NOCIRC.
That's right.
She was at a conference and he saw her and encouraged her to keep it up. So what a man. I really miss him.
Yeah, I miss him too. Yeah, I loved that man. I invited him to speak at a conference when I was in Vermont. I think it was Educators for Peace conference, everything. And he said, well, you know, I'm pretty expensive. This was one of his last years. And he said, you know, it would be $3,000. Oh, they don't have that budget. Okay. And then I called again a couple years later, and his wife, his widow at that point, asked, well, who are you? And I think it was about a year after he died. She said, I regret to tell you my dear husband has passed. And I said, oh my God. And she mentioned how many years they've been married. I said, oh, that must have been really amazing. She said, it was quite an experience. Yeah. And it was just, there was a lot of love I felt. I don't remember her exact words, but I was just, it was beautiful. It was beautiful. Yeah. He was great.
Well, thank you, Mitch. This has been quite a tour de force of so many different areas. And your animation, that's what yeah,
sometimes when I've been like one of the teachers at workshops or trainings and everything, and they ask people to fill out like what did they like about it. Some of them would say Mitch's laugh, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm going to end the recording now. Thank you for participating, and
Well, thank you, Jack. This was completely unplanned and spontaneous, and
the best way.
yeah.
And we'll end with that laugh.
Okay, good. And so, because I feel comfortable with you, so I just figure I'm going to be myself, and it's,
Yeah.
you know, no plan.
All right.